this is no, you've just given me a tough question. Like I'm, and it's just going to take me a while to think through it. I would say I am a theologically conservative, evangelical Christian, and progressive Democrat.
All right.
So
I'm gonna
that
write this down just to make sure I can remember. Theologically conservative, since it seems they've put some thought into this.
theologically conservative, evangelical Christian, and progressive Democrat. Um, but what that essentially means is that I uh, believe in Jesus and the Trinity. If you basically took the general creeds of all of the major uh, Protestant Christianity beliefs and merged them together and found out which ones were similar, that's kind of what I would believe. I lean towards what's called sola scriptura, which
Okay.
is where the conservative part comes into my
Yeah.
theology, which is to say that uh, for as much as is possible, what I believe about Christianity is derived from Scripture.
Okay.
So in Catholicism, uh, they they obviously they believe more than Scripture. They have doctrine, they have the
Sure.
teachings of the Holy Father, etc.
Sure.
Um, but then the evangelical part comes out from I believe that given those beliefs, I'm compelled to share them.
Okay.
Like it's just I remember at a very young age hearing the analogy like if you believed you had the cure for cancer and then you didn't share it, like what kind of person would that be?
Right.
There's actually a really great video with I think Penn is the one who talks.
Yeah.
Can't remember Penn and
Penn
Teller.
Gillette. Yeah.
Yeah, and he mentions like one of the most endearing moments of his career was when a man from the audience came up and said, "I loved your show," blah blah blah, and gave him a Bible, and he was like, "I don't believe any of this." I mean, he's quite a famous atheist,
Yeah.
but at the same time, at least he cares about me.
Right.
Like,
Yeah.
if you believe in this and you don't do that, then um, there's also a parable in the New Testament about that, where a father asked both of his sons to show up. One says he will, one says he wasn't or says he won't to help with the harvest. And then one does show up, but it's the one who said he wasn't going to.
Hmm.
And the one who promised he would didn't. And moral of the story, the one who showed up was the one who was praised. It's sort of like an actions speak louder than words kind of thing. But
Right.
at
Yeah.
the same time, back to the beginning, I think once you accept the core doctrines of Christianity, you are um, compelled to share it. But
Okay.
then one of the things that um, has come out of my Christian beliefs is a justification for my political beliefs. And when I think of political, I think that's the majority way in which I interact with the world. Like, uh, I meet lots of people and I have one-on-one interactions, but my vote has a much more profound impact on a lot more people than would handing a homeless person a certain amount of money or,
Hmm.
uh, and it's not to say that that kind of like volunteerism isn't important. It's just that in a democracy, I think our strongest way to help others, which is, I believe, a core command of Christianity, is through our democratic rights and responsibilities. And so my interpretation of the Bible leads me to a progressive Democrat position,
Okay.
which means there are a lot of things that I think are immoral, but should not be illegal, if
Uh
that
huh.
makes sense.
Uh huh.
Because I think that there are a number of, or that there is a sincere and important difference between uh, what we as Christians have agreed is good and our responsibility as Christians to uh, get people to believe the same thing, but at the same time, not to use uh, legal remedies to, um, I guess, beat that into people. In fact, I would say that there are clear counterexamples in the New Testament where Jesus quite explicitly opposes that.
Okay.
So anyway,
All right.
that's the picture.
All right.
Hopefully, I gave you enough.
Yeah. So let me start by just sort of saying it back to you to make sure that I have the idea.
Cool.
So in terms of your belief in Christianity, you're conservative, traditional, maybe strict, based on the scripture, based on the Bible,
Yep.
and that all has an implication or a corollary where you want to spread the message, and it affects how you interact with the world and how you want to encourage other people to interact with the world.
Yeah.
And that winds up being the left side, the
Correct.
progressive
Yeah.
politics. Okay, so we have an hour. I'm not sure if we could cover religion alone in an hour or politics alone in an hour. Certainly, we can't cover both in an hour. We can try to see how much we can get to. So, one thing I just people who've commented on the other videos have noticed that, or have noted that these conversations kind of just appear, and they don't really understand the context. So before we go ahead, I'm just going to spend like a minute saying that
Go for it.
You and I have known each other for like 20 years. We haven't talked a whole lot recently, but we have a history of long conversations late into the night, way back in the
Great
day.
ones.
Yeah, and I asked people on Facebook who wants to have a conversation, and you replied. So that's pretty much where this conversation came from.
Yep. Yeah. This is like just like our conversations and a couple of other conversations I had in high school, except there's a camera trained on it.
Right. So
it's
a
really,
little different.
And I think both of us are probably a little bit more sophisticated in our views.
And maybe a little bit calmer.
Yeah.
Hopefully.
Yeah. Although it's fun. It's fun. It's fun.
Okay. Okay, so let's start with the religion and then see how far we get and move to the politics. And I think for you it is part and parcel, but we'll see how it goes.
Yeah.
So the thing that I'm asking everybody to start off, right, is why do you believe in Christianity? What is
Absolutely.
Your
so I think
reasoning?
It would be totally naive of me to not say that it at least began with the fact that I grew up in a Bible believing family. And as an adult,
you probably see this, but I have the chat open. I'm just going to like write down stuff that I hear you saying so that you can check and make sure, so that I can remember too. But
that's a good idea. I can open it up and make sure you're not lying.
Right.
And as an adult, I recognize just how much of a part of my life it was. I mean,
the tradition and the social stuff.
And you know, as an adult, you know, my family, you know, attends on Sundays, and we try to do some church stuff. And there's religious talk within the family. But growing up, you know, Sunday morning we were there. We would eat lunch at church. We would return Sunday evening for Devo, and we would also go back on Wednesday nights. And so every week, there was probably between 6 and 8 hours of community religious experience. But honestly, what cemented, so my parents were kind of upset because it took me so long to get baptized. My twin brother as well. We decided when we were around 15 years old, we grew up in a church that believes in baptism of believers, which means that we don't baptize children. Wait till you're old enough to make a decision for yourself, but obviously there's a big question about what that age of accountability is. But it wasn't until we were 15, and that timing wasn't random. It was right around the time that one of our good friends converted to Islam, and in this just bizarre twisted, nerdy version of the Breakfast Club. There was myself and my twin brother Scott. There are these two atheists at the time. Aaron, I'm not sure what his beliefs are now, and David is now, or at least last I checked, about a year and a half ago, was a professing Christian. There was a Mormon, Heidi, and there was John, who had. Oh, there were two Methodists, and there's John, who had converted from being a Methodist to a Muslim. And we would meet in the journalism room during lunch and debate our
and
beliefs.
talk religion, yeah.
And we would literally go out and buy books or print stuff off the internet, many of which, in retrospect, not exactly your most reputable sources. So sometimes the things that were said were a bit cruel. And out of that group, as far as I know, only one person ever changed their mind, and that was David. But David actually, the household he grew up in was Christian and practicing. But regardless, it gave me an opportunity to really, forced upon me a responsibility to check whether or not it was reasonable to believe what I believed. Okay. And I think that's one of the core questions that people get wrong, is that most of us think that everybody else out there keeps working on their beliefs until they find what's right. And I think most of us work on figuring out our beliefs until we are comfortable that they're reasonable. And part of that is just expedient. It would just take forever. And people dedicate their entire lives to solving just a single question. But at that time in my life, I felt like after all of these differences of opinions had been lodged against me, facts, whatever, and I had done the same to others, that I felt my beliefs generally stood. Although what came out of that were a couple of changes in what I believe. And one of them that I think is big and is probably worth exploring here is that even though I would say I generally believe in sola scriptura, which, once again, just means that what we know about Christianity is and being a Christian, it comes from the Bible, or is best attained from the Bible.
Yeah.
That's where we should go for authority, is that I'm not committed to what's called biblical inerrantism, which the proper definition of is that the Bible is inerrant in what it teaches. It doesn't mean there aren't scribal errors. It doesn't mean that there aren't metaphors and all sorts of other stuff in there, but what it teaches is correct. And I don't feel like I need to commit myself to that in order to think that the core beliefs of Christianity, what C.S. Lewis called mere Christianity, is true, and that that's sufficient for me to affirm the core beliefs of Christianity. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So there's a lot of interesting stuff there. I think a lot of people have conversations when they're young that affect the trajectory of their beliefs in their life.
Yeah.
But just to sort of sum it up, it sounds like one of the things that is your reason, or the reason for your belief, is growing up in a household that was religious and spent a lot of time with religion. Mm-hmm. Can you categorize what it was about those conversations that are a reason for you? Or
yeah, so I mean, the first thing I would say, like, generally you get this kind of scoffing position on the internet, and I'm not putting this on you.
Sure.
But people are like, oh, you just believe that because your parents believed that. And I'm just like, well, what percentage of the things that you believe came from what your parents told you?
Sure. Yeah.
Like, I never touched the proverbial hot stove, or hot I just my parents just
Yeah,
told me
because it
don't,
said
and
don't
I
touch it.
didn't.
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh, and I don't think it was wrong for me. I shouldn't have said no. That is not epistemically sound.
Right. Yeah.
You
I
know,
need to test it. Yeah.
uh, yeah, verification. And but I think there were a couple of things that kind of gave me this more analytic focus on Christianity. Um, and I think I should admit something in a moment. Um, my dad has a PhD in biochemistry. And so
Okay.
we grew up also in a house that believed that evolution occurred. Now,
Okay.
he believed very much in what's theistic evolution, and the variation that he believed in was essentially that the parts of evolution that are difficult to describe as happening by chance, like when you start looking at the length of time that was available, population ecology, all that kind of stuff, it can be described by agent, or it could be answered by agency. That is to say that there's some directedness to it. There's some
Okay.
teleology involved, and that nuance was enough for me to recognize, wait, there's more to this than you know than what's written on the pages of this Bible, what I learned in Sunday school. Um,
I see.
and and so it made it such that my understanding of Christianity wasn't uh, as thin, I guess. So a lot of people will base their Christianity heavily on personal experience.
Okay.
I don't think that's wrong. In fact, I very much that's what part of Reformed epistemology is that the vast majority of our beliefs are based on, or at least begin with, personal experience.
Okay.
Um,
Do you
but
use personal experience to get to your belief?
uh, to many of my beliefs, yes.
Okay.
Um, but
About
not
Christianity.
anymore. In the beginning, certainly
Oh, okay.
there was some, but not a lot. The only real religious experience that I can think of that was moving, like where I felt like, wow, this is something interesting. Uh,
We don't have to
the
talk.
church.
I'm just trying to get the broad strokes of your
Okay,
reasons for
well,
for.
just real quickly, I thought this was a cool event.
Okay.
It was likely coincidental, but we were outside. We played wall ball on the side of our church growing up. Throw a tennis ball at it. If somebody catches it, then you get to peg them.
Mm.
I'm sure Jesus approved of that. And my parents come out, and it's kind of like a stormy, gross day, and they're like rushing us in. They're like, what are you doing? We want to play wall ball. We know that lunch isn't ready yet. And they're like, no, no, somebody's getting baptized. So they bring us in, and someone in the church, I don't remember who, was getting baptized. And, we're little kids and we're all like, pissed off. Like, I want to be outside playing wall ball. I don't really care about watching this. And then we walk out. I mean, the skies are just like beautifully clear and there's a rainbow.
Mm.
And at the time, I didn't think to myself, God just put a rainbow there. But it did just have this impact on me of like uh that something beautiful just happened. And so there's actually an argument from beauty that I've come upon later in life. uh so I would say most of my beliefs now have been either have transitioned or been bolstered by arguments for Christianity or
Okay.
arguments for theism.
Okay.
But those i I really want to not intentionally shed my beliefs of those events. Like, I think they mattered. I think they're real, or at least they're important. And I don't want to pretend that they aren't there, that I'm just some sort of like intellectual sitting on a chair
Okay.
and I have now figured out Christianity
Okay.
through reason alone.
So what I'm hearing is that you're tempted to try to use arguments and things like
Yeah,
that to found your belief, but you want to make sure not to completely get rid of the idea of personal experience.
absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Okay, so we've heard like growing up with Christianity, somewhat personal experiences, and then you've brought up this idea of arguments.
Yes. So
Um,
the last 4 years, I've gotten addicted to philosophy of religion in
right.
particular, and then a bunch of areas of philosophy that tie into it. Um, but most of it is related to apologetics. So
Yeah,
being able to give reasons for my beliefs uh, beyond just uh, because the Bible tells me so.
sure. Yeah. Would you say then, like if we were to make a pie chart, like that arguments account for, I don't want to give you a number, but like 50% or something like that, and personal experience is 25%. Like, what's the breakdown?
It would be really okay. So I like the analogy, but I would like to try and use maybe a different type of
Sure.
chart.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah,
Uh,
okay. All right. That's fine.
so I think the way to think about it would be sort of like building a structure up,
Okay.
where you've got foundational beliefs, and
Okay.
then you can add on to that. Um, and there are now probably 3 or 4 arguments that I find so convincing that I would need all of them to be toppled for me to give up my religion, or
Okay.
to give up Christianity.
All right.
Uh,
So sounds like
but
arguments are really important.
they are, but at the same time, I think I could have an experience that trumps those. So,
You
like, I
think you
could,
had an experience, or that it's
no,
possible to have
it's
one?
possible to.
Okay.
So, like, I don't, you know, that it's possible that I could have a religious experience related to any number of other religions that would that would trump those others,
Okay.
I guess. Although they probably wouldn't pull me out of theism in general, uh, but they could pull me out of Christianity.
Okay. Okay. So, but before we dive more into these reasons, how confident would you say you are that Christianity is true, the way that you understand it? Like, if we had a scale from 0 to 100, where 50 was I don't know, I don't have a belief, and 100
Yeah,
was I can't be wrong, I'm absolutely certain, and 0 was it's definitely not true, I can't be wrong about that.
I would put myself somewhere in the 80 to 90% category that I'm
Okay.
confident in Christianity.
Okay.
At least I'm confident in these core beliefs of Christianity. Like, if
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
asked
Yeah.
me, did uh, loads of dead people actually raise up at the end of
Right.
Matthew and walk
Right.
around like zombies? I would say I'm like 20%. Like, I'm pretty sure that didn't
Okay.
happen, and that's apocalyptic literature.
But what
Uh,
about the bodily
so
resurrection of Jesus Christ?
that would be one of my highest,
Okay.
like,
So
strongest beliefs. It would actually be, of those arguments that I said are really convincing. No, the simple facts argument for the resurrection is pretty convincing to me.
okay, so let's say if we just pick that one thing, you'd be 80 to 90% confident that he
Yeah,
resurrected in body. Okay.
yeah.
Okay.
And I think
Um,
the word resurrection there is really important, as opposed to there's like this alternate that nobody ever really uses in regular language, but revivification.
mhm.
So resurrection has a very specific meaning in Christianity and Judaism, which is you are resurrected into a body that never dies. Like, that is the body that you will carry on to eternity. Where revivified is you're brought back to life and you will die again. So Lazarus, the example in the New Testament of Jesus
Uh-huh.
raising somebody from the dead, Lazarus goes on to die after he's been
Okay.
revived or brought from the dead. And so resurrection, and that plays a kind of an important part in the argument for uh, in the simple facts argument for why we would believe that the resurrection occurred.
Okay. Can we use this because this is obviously a very large topic. Can we use this as sort of a shorthand for this sort of cluster of beliefs, that the idea of the resurrection of Jesus?
I think there are 2 arguments, that being one, and another, which is generally called the contingency argument, that are my two big ones. And if we were going to tackle those in today, I would be happy.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So, all right. So just let me try to reframe this stuff and what I heard.
It's like
That
GP3 summarization.
I mean, yeah, honestly. But it's important, I think, for two people who maybe are coming from a different place to,
Yeah, I agree.
in order to communicate well, I think it's really helpful to hear your own words back and to say that is what I meant to
Hugely.
say. That's not what I meant to say. Yeah. So here's what I'm hearing. While you can imagine, you could be convinced by, let's say, personal experience. It sounds like what's the main thing behind your belief, at least today, is arguments, theological arguments.
Yeah.
And there are maybe two things that we're gonna that are important to you. Two sort of groups of things: arguments for the resurrection of Jesus Christ, and this thing that you've called the contingency argument.
Right.
And those things maybe are foundational for your belief, like
I would say they are now foundational. Yeah.
okay, yeah. You talked about not a pie chart, but maybe a building, and these things are at the bottom then.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right,
One way
good.
to
So
think
this is
about it is, just real quickly,
yeah.
I built these beliefs that I'm standing on top of, and somebody comes in with a competing belief, knocks me off the top. What do I grab onto as I fall? And probably the first two that I would grab onto, if I'm defending Christianity, would be the resurrection. If I'm defending my
Okay.
general theism, I would choose the contingency
Okay.
argument.
So this is fantastic. Like I feel like honestly it's so helpful to even to understand like this part of a belief. Like what is getting you there? What is it relying on? So let's try a hypothetical. So
Sure.
imagine that 5 years from now, you had become convinced that for whatever reason Jesus Christ had not resurrected, and this contingency argument was bunk. Like it just didn't quite work. It had a flaw in it. Whatever. So down the road, those two things you've been shaken about.
Yeah.
What would that do to your 80 to 90% confidence number?
So it would take a couple more bricks to make a big change. That might bring me to 75, 80.
Okay.
But then once you take a couple more bricks out, then I am dead stuck in agnosticism. But I want to say that there are also some arguments that I have that make me feel like naturalism, or at least the belief that there is no God or nothing like God. I have arguments for why I believe that that's metaphysically impossible. So there's a whole other question about moving in beyond that 50% of agnosticism.
Okay.
Like I just don't know. Which is basically where most people would find themselves, or at least internet atheists these days who refer to themselves as, I just don't have a belief in God, versus I actively disbelieve in God.
Okay.
I would fall into the I just don't have a belief
So
part.
let me make sure I understand. So it sounds like you're saying that these two things are the things that get you from 75 up to 90.
Well, think about the best way I think is from a person who's done, I am sure, a large number of linear regressions in your lifetime. That there are certain variables that overlap, and just by
Sure.
pulling out one, you don't lose everything. And that's what many of the arguments that I have, so the contingency argument leads to a definition of a necessarily existing being. But so does this whole other argument called the kalam cosmological argument, which I'm not quite as convinced by,
Yeah.
although I'm pretty convinced by it. Um, and so if I lose contingency, this one probably makes up the majority of it. There's a lot of overlap. So I don't want to say that the contingency argument only gives me a little bit. I think it's a pretty substantial piece of pie, but it can be removed and other things can fill its
So
place.
let me try
Some
asking you this then. What is
it'd take a
getting
long
you?
time
What's
to
that?
go over all the arguments. Uh,
So yeah, I'm trying to identify what the most important things are. So like, could you identify what's getting you from 50%, from that middle, like all the way up to 75?
yeah, so I think a better general idea, instead of focusing on just the argument, although I think it's worth discussing, um, is that my justification for rational or my rationalization of what the world is and how it can be and all of that
Okay.
kind of stuff is dependent upon some sort of understanding that come to from a series of arguments. And then also my understanding that I've come to from a series of experiences. And those combined get me up to 70 or 80 or to 80 or 90%. Now,
Okay.
um, if anything, compared to other Christians, I would say that my experience side is pretty weak.
Okay.
And I think that's more of a psychological thing than anything else. I just have this bias towards wanting
Sure.
more of a
Sure.
rational, uh, as apologists like to say it, I want to be able to show it rather than know it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I'm looking for reasons that can be expressed in ways that others can understand as
So
opposed to my own
could
subjective
you
understanding.
point to any of those arguments, like being something that gets you from 50 to all the way to 75 or 80?
Yeah, so I would probably put it as like a combination of three or four.
Okay.
Um, there's the contingency argument, although if you want to get deep
We'll
into it, I would
we'll
say
definitely
Alexander.
talk about it once we sort of
Okay,
establish
well, I would
what's,
just
yeah.
say it's the version that I like the most right now is Alexander Pruss's version of it, who's a philosopher at Baylor. Um, the second would be the Kalam cosmological argument, which
Okay.
is most commonly proposed by William Lane Craig,
William
but
Lane Craig, yeah.
actually, I would say Alexander Pruss's recent work on causal infinities is what drove it home for me.
Okay.
I was always much more skeptical of it until this Pruss took a whack at it and hit
All
it out
right.
of the ballpark. Third would be uh, the argument from morality, which would be specifically obligations and duties. I don't see how we have moral obligations or duties without a God. I can see how we could have moral values. I just
Okay.
don't see how we're obligated to any of them
Okay.
without a God. And then uh, the last one would be this new argument from this guy named Josh Rasmussen, who makes this argument similar to the contingency argument called the argument from arbitrary limits. But those four are the ones that are theism. The one that gets me to Christianity would be the resurrection, although also a bit of the moral argument, because I think some of the moral obligations within Christianity that I believe to be true uh,
Okay.
would require a justification in an argument like the moral argument. So they
So
bolster each other.
let's try the thought
But
experiment again. So
shoot,
let's say 5 years down the road, you've thought about this stuff, you've learned a lot of things, you've listened to people, you've worked on your own arguments, and you've come to doubt the contingency arguments, the Kalam cosmological argument, the arguments from obligations and duties about morality, and Josh Rasmussen's argument from arbitrary limits. You've come to
yeah,
doubt all of these things.
yeah,
You're no longer confident that they're good arguments.
yep.
Where would you be now on the scale in your belief in Christianity?
So there's a difference of where I should be versus where I
Okay.
would be.
I
I think I
appreciate you
should,
making that.
yeah, I think I
Yeah.
should be at 50% flat.
Okay.
So although I might be a little bit lower, I might be at 40% because I might, because the problem of evil is a significant enough objection
Okay.
to an all good God. Um, it depends on how I'm feeling about that. A lot of my theodicy and explaining that is dependent upon um, a Christian God and not just a God. So if I
Right.
lost my belief in Christianity, then the theodicy becomes weaker. Now, what would I believe?
Right. That's
That's
which
harder to
is
know, and I'm guessing I would probably still lean towards Christianity, both out of comfort um, and out of so you can imagine that at that point I would recognize that my belief making faculties are to a degree untrustworthy
okay.
because I've been
Interesting.
waffling.
Right.
And so at that point, I would have to say to myself, I both am not too confident about, or the fact that I am not confident about what I used to be so confident about is reason to be not confident about what I'm so confident about now.
Hmm.
And so at that point, I might just choose like a stasis. Like I'm not going to change that much. But what I probably would do, what it would impact the most would be the vigor with which I defend things.
Uh-huh.
So I would be more willing to say, I'm not sure, but this is what I believe. I don't know. And um, yeah, and it would be a lot less interesting of conversation because they'd end a lot more quickly. But
Okay.
yeah, I'm willing to admit that I probably wouldn't go as far as if I were to just if a new person was born today with those beliefs, what would they think about this question? I don't think that I probably would choose to remain a Christian or at least Christian like
Right. There's certainly the
because of my
difference
history.
in acting like a Christian and believing it.
Mm.
Right. You could certainly do the
Well,
first
and
without
there
the
certainly is a
second.
difference between acting like what a Christian's supposed to act like and acting
That's
like
true
what
too. That's
Christians
true
do.
too. But I
Uh,
just meant you could do the actions without necessarily the belief.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
There's actually this uh, progressive Christianity is actually a kind of a dirty word um, because it doesn't mean progressivism in the sense of like how we vote.
Hmm.
It's about sort of like, okay, we're not quite confident in
Yeah.
what actually happened
But
in
it
the
still
Bible
seems like a
and
good
that
way to
kind of stuff.
live.
But yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah.
Okay, so this is fantastic. I feel like we've already done some really good stuff. So, one, I think we've identified these four things as being pretty foundational, which is important. And then I really I really like how you said you recognize them as foundational, but even if your belief in them was shaken, you might still have a tendency to sort of stick to this. Maybe
Yeah.
because of how you were brought up or something like that, or just
Yeah.
the fact that we're both getting old and it's really hard to,
To
yeah,
change.
yeah. But I think I hear exactly where you're coming from. Like there would be a shaken, a
Yeah.
shaking. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay. That's great. So then we can talk about these things and we can say, you know, um, we can see how they're propping up your confidence. Is there one of these in these four that maybe you want to start with that maybe is the
Yeah.
best of the four?
I like the contingency argument the best
Okay. So
because
do you want to explain
yeah,
it?
I'll give a um, quick run through. It was first formulated by Leibniz,
Okay.
co-creator of calculus, um, but it's been lots of arguments like this in the history of philosophy. A philosopher will come up with it, another one will pick issues at it, and another one will reformulate it, and it gets reformulated
Sure.
until eventually
It's like
it
mixing, sampling in
yeah,
in hip hop. Yeah.
exactly. And eventually you'll get to either a fatal error or something that's really strong.
Yeah.
And I
Okay.
think the latest versions are really, really strong. So the way it generally works is this. Um, there are two types of things in the world. They're either things, or everything that exists either exists because of a cause external to itself or because of the necessity of its own existence. So this is sort of like law of excluded middle.
Okay.
Either you
Uh,
exist because of something else or because of yourself.
okay.
Like you either have to exist or you don't have to exist.
Okay.
And things that don't have to exist are caused. Some examples of this would be like the guitar behind you. You don't, I think we intuit that you don't have to have a guitar behind you. The
Sure.
world could have been a different way. But we would say that some other things are necessary. Like it's almost impossible to understand a world in which the concept of one and the concept of plus and the concept of one and the concept of equals does not yield the concept of two. Like we could change what we call one plus one equals and two, but that seems to be uh, almost beyond axiomatic. Like it has to be that way. It's necessary. So we can forget about some of the necessary stuff for a second and just think about the list of all of the things that are contingent. So we could say um, there is the guitar there because Chucky put it there because he was interviewing me, because I, you know, went to him on Facebook, because I like to hear myself talk, because blah, blah, blah. You just go on this long list. And you can imagine these long chains.
Yeah.
Some of them can be over time,
Okay.
like that would be over time, but some of them could be hierarchical. We could say uh, that is there because um, gravity is holding in its position, and gravity
Sure.
is holding in its position because gravity has these certain constants.
Right.
Um,
And the
and
gravity's from Earth, and Earth is here because
here,
of
yeah,
so and
exactly.
so,
So,
and
and
yeah.
all this is at the same time, simultaneous. So you can either think of this chain that way or that way.
Uh,
But what you can do is think of the whole thing as a bunch of chains that are connected.
okay.
And we could call this the big cosmic contingent fact.
Okay.
So if we listed all the facts out that are contingent, well, the question is that once we get to the end of the contingent fact, how do we explain either the last item that was added to this big contingent fact? And if that explanation is
The
itself
last meaning the
contingent,
first.
yeah, correct.
Uh-huh.
Whether we're talking hierarchical
Uh-huh.
or historical, uh, if that explanation is itself contingent, it has to join the
Okay.
BCCF, the big cosmic contingent fact. Um, so we either have a vicious regress where there's an infinite regress of contingent things and nothing has a foundation,
So the chain could be
or
infinitely long.
exactly, or not just infinitely long, but infinitely, because you could think about it also as it doesn't just have a beginning, it doesn't even have a bottom. Like that, just explaining one little item right now, why it's here and how it's sustained is impossible, because like all of its facts about what sustains that guitar right there in this moment in time these are all contingent facts as we go down. Um, and because of that, the argument that Leibniz made is that there must be a necessary explanation of the BCCF. And if that's true, then we can think about all the things that are in the BCCF: matter, energy, light, the major components. And if anything is to be a cause of something, it can't be that thing. So if I um like, because that would be self-causation. Does that make sense? Like
So
I can create more of myself, but I can't create myself. Um, so at any rate, that would essentially mean that what we're left with is this necessary being that, or, or necessary something that explains the existence of everything, which means that it must be immaterial. It must be, what is it? Spaceless, timeless, and have the causal powers to bring about or sustain all of these things. And that's the gist. We start with all of the stuff that has to be explained, put it into a single long sentence, and then say what explains this. If that thing is contingent, it just makes the sentence longer. If that thing is necessary, then as Leibniz quite famously put it, uh, we all know this thing to be God, because of the characteristics that I just described. That is, that it has a causal power to create everything, that it's spaceless, timeless, immaterial, etc.
okay,
So
okay,
that's the, and the cool thing about the contingency argument is if you find it uh, convincing, if you think that that's true, that means then that pretty much everything in existence uh, is evidence for God. Because we could forget the whole universe, and the universe could just be your guitar, and that one string of
hmm
explanations is sufficient to create a BCCF. So, even the smallest thing stands as proof. So you can understand that once I've accepted this one little, or this conclusion, then this becomes a really powerful argument because everything that I look and see is explained, uh, or its existence is explained by God. So everything, the ledger just gets the whole universe dropped on one side, or the weights.
okay. So I'm gonna try to state it back to you just to make sure that you feel like you've communicated this idea.
Yep.
But trying to be brief, the idea is that the causes for things, both through time and in an instant of time, these two sort of dimensions of cause that you're talking about,
Real
um,
quickly and briefly, it can be a cause or an explanation. Uh, it's just worth.
things
So,
things can be causes or explanations.
well, you can think of it in terms of causes or an explanation. So, like, what explains a guitar being there?
Uh
Uh,
huh.
we could make a chain of causes, or we can make a chain of explanations.
I see.
So,
You're saying the explanation is one dimension, and then the sort of
yeah,
temporal
like,
cause is the other dimension.
correct. Like, gravity doesn't cause something to happen. Gravity is a description of something happening.
Okay.
Um, but
Um,
it's an explanation.
okay. So
Okay,
the
but anyway,
I mean, make sure that I'm understanding it.
that's nitpicky. But somebody in your comments might uh, catch on to the difference between causality and explanation. And anyway, I just wanted to make
Okay.
sure for that
Um,
one asshole.
so, but generally, and I don't. I'm just trying to state this back to make sure that I understand the gist. I don't think we're going to go into the details of this. We're going to talk about stuff around it, but
Yeah,
but the idea is that because something having a cause or something having an explanation, and then that thing needs a cause or an explanation. Um, either that either that process continues indefinitely, or it has a beginning, either temporally or
right,
explanatorily. And if it has a beginning, then that thing we can call God.
correct.
Okay, all right. Um, so one thing I notice about this is that it's fairly abstract.
Yeah,
It's sort of it's an argument in the air, right? We're sort of saying this follows from this and this follows from this.
correct. It doesn't use any science or like
Like
the kalam cosmological argument does, but yeah, it doesn't use any uh, experiential knowledge.
right. Um, so I'm going to ask a question that I think might be a little hard to answer because this idea is important to you. So try to think slowly about it. It's a very general idea. Is
Okay.
it possible for arguments to be wrong but sound right?
Of course.
Okay, all right. I'm certainly not saying that this is wrong
Yeah,
but sounds
but
right. But
I
it's
mean
possible.
that's Descartes 101. Like I could be confused by the math that's sitting in front of me that looks like
Right,
there's no way that 1 + 1 is
right,
not equal to, but maybe there's this demon in front of me that's got me convinced.
right.
You know?
Okay. All right. So good because I feel the same way. I feel like I've had far too much school and I've often been in this situation in a class or something where I'm like, this must be, it can't possibly be anywhere else
Yeah.
because of this argument. But then I find out,
Anyone in
oh, I missed
quantum
this.
physics 101?
I've always been bad at physics. I'm just thinking like a math argument, but
Yeah.
um, like I've had this experience where I missed this idea, or I didn't realize that this little thing in the corner was actually important, and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
You acknowledge that it's possible for this argument to
Yes.
sound convincing, but not actually to hold.
Correct.
Okay. In general, do you find yourself gravitating more towards empirical argument, like empirical reasons, or like abstract arguments?
I actually tend to find myself move. So at first, I moved more towards empirical. So, like the kalam is one that starts with that there's a beginning of the universe, um, and then or the fine tuning arguments, which look at the initial constants and quantities of the beginning of the universe and how they're necessary for certain reasons, um, or not necessary for sentient life. But what I found is that the physics that gets brought into those ends up being every bit as wish-washy, esoteric, floating in the air. Like, the the response to the kalam has often been um, the no boundary condition. Uh, I think it was first. It was the maybe Hawking Penrose. Um, but the idea is that as space came together, there wasn't a singularity. It's like the curve of a ball. Like there's no more north than north, and there's no actual beginning. It just rounds off. Like
Mm-hmm.
um and so it just breaks down into more just math and logic, even when we start talking about scientific things. And part of that is because of what we would call the mathematization of science,
Mm.
which is where
We
like
call it math envy.
okay, yeah, well,
Yeah.
that's great, but I mean, it's insane that a guy like Higgs can sit there in his armchair, write out a bunch of equations, and then come up with this uh, concept of the Higgs boson, and then 40, 50 years later,
Mm.
uh, it gets proven in this massive particle accelerator that he couldn't imagine creating. Um, but it was math that did it. And so I kind of feel like screw it. Let's just go straight to the math. Let's go straight to the logic.
Right.
And
That really
um,
gets to the root of my question, right? Like, is it the experiment that can actually point to here's the thing we've been looking for, or the argument that's more convincing for you? Like, which would you rather have? If
that's a
if you
good question.
if you could
Um,
have either one, which would you rather have about God, about Christianity?
oh, I would much rather have an experience. Yeah. But that's partially because of what I believe about God. So, like, I think it would be rad. Um,
So if you could have, let me just make sure we're on the same page. If you could have like an experiment or a testable way of saying, "Oh, look,
oh,
there
okay, that's
there he
different. Yeah.
is."
Yeah. If I could have a testable way, yeah, I'd prefer that mostly because of that, uh, that people just believe with their eyes more
Right.
than anything else.
Right.
Uh,
Do you think that's a good thing?
no.
You think it's better
Yeah.
to
So, well, the reason why I think it's a bad thing is I think that people downplay their sense or various sense perceptions. Um, like people trust their eyes first, then maybe they trust their what they feel or touch, and then maybe their smell or their ears. But what it's really about is what senses are appropriate for detecting what things. Like if you asked me to detect argon, like what sense would I use? Like
what
there just isn't
sense
one. I mean, it's
what
a
sense
inert
do
gas without a smell that, the only thing that would happen is I'd die because I'd breathe it in. But
sure, yeah,
regard,
or
yeah,
carbon
maybe,
monoxide, yeah.
yeah, exactly. So and if you wanted me to detect natural gas in a house, I would use my nose because they've added chemicals that smell. And so when we talk about detecting God, I just ask myself what senses would be appropriate for detecting an immaterial being. Like, it would it be my eyes? And that just seems wrong. And then on top of that, when I think about that, if God really is the underlying foundation, like ultimate reality, then we should be able to see God in the structure of reality. And when I think about the structure of reality, I think about math. Like I think um, so. This
So
is
let's go back just to make sure
okay
I understand, because I heard you say at first, and maybe this was just a misunderstanding, but I heard you say that you'd rather have experiential, like
for me.
yeah, like your gut craves this, I guess maybe is how to say it, like
I would love to have that feeling that some people have described. Yeah.
right, like for God to come down and say, "Hey, I'm God. How's it going?
Yeah.
Do you have any questions?" We yeah. Um, and
I,
to be able
I'd
to,
be
like
satisfied with a fist bump. That'd be good.
a fist bump or a hug, right?
Well, not during
Um,
COVID.
yeah. Does Jesus wear a mask? That's too political.
Haploid or diploid?
But to be able to like
Think about that one.
take a camera and see that, right, like capture that evidence. Your gut wants that. Is that what you're saying?
For me, I would like a personal experience that is on par with what others have described. But for um, demonstrating to the world,
Yeah, I mean,
this
maybe
is
I'm not
yeah,
really.
this is no, you've just given me a tough question. Like I'm, and it's just going to take me a while to think through it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I'm uh, yeah,
I mean, it
I
seems like
don't
when
know.
people talk about personal experience, they're not really talking about photographs,
Correct.
right? They're talking about feelings.
Yeah, and my belief about that is that feelings get a bad rap.
Right.
Like,
Oh, I
like
see.
I,
Uh-huh.
yeah. So that's what I was getting at with like you place a particular sense with, what's the appropriate sense to detect X, Y, or Z, and then if you ask that question of an immaterial God, like,
So I think
what's it going to be?
I'm
Well, it
trying to
sounds
make
like
it easier. I'm trying to actually make this easier than worrying about feelings. Like I'm suggesting something that I think people don't even consider. Like what if you could video God, and what if you could run experiments and test it physically? Like would that be better? Would that be more convincing?
I think it would convince more people to believe that God exists.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I don't believe
What
that it would
about
be.
you? Would it be more convincing for you? Like you there's this
I don't.
guy who
Not
came
not
down.
now. Not at this point. I don't think I would need that. Um.
Let me run the hypothetical.
Okay.
See what you think. So some a vision appears before you and says, "I'm God. Do you have any questions?" You say, "How do I know you're God?" right? And he says, well, what do you want? And he points to the sky, and it writes, I am God in the stars,
Correct.
right? And whatever you ask him to do, he can demonstrate. And you say, gosh, maybe I'm having, it was the mushrooms that I ate were not normal mushrooms.
Well,
And so you videotape it, and then you watch it back. Other people watch it, and they see these things. That's not really the personal experience that people talk about, right?
correct.
So
Well, most. Some people have claim to have experienced that via miracles, and then there are supposed video evidence of that kind of stuff, which
sure,
I'm
yeah.
highly skeptical of. But
So if you had this thing happen, right, where to your personal satisfaction, right, you recorded it, you used a camera, you asked your wife, hey, do you see what I'm seeing? And everybody agrees, right? This is what we see.
yeah,
Would that be more satisfying than the arguments like contingency, kalam?
it would be more convincing in terms of simple belief. Yes.
You seem unsatisfied with that somehow.
Satisfaction is the word that's um, difficult for me to be clear about.
The impression
So,
I'm getting is that yes, you would be more convinced, but there's something missing.
yeah, some of it is I think there's an intrinsic beauty in uh, this recognition um, that that comes with with understanding that God is the foundation of reality, and and that we're experiencing in it. And let me come at it from two directions. So the first is the beginning of John, the fourth gospel, where he says, "In the beginning there was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God." And the word there is logos, which obviously, as you can imagine, uh, is where we get the word logic from. And you got to think like, what is a early second century writer talking about when he says at the beginning there was logic and the logic was with God and logic was God? Like that's such a profoundly bizarre and at the same time incredible statement to make when now thousands of years later we're probing the smallest parts of the real world and we just run into math. We like it's to me there's just some like intrinsic structural beauty to that. So that's one side of things. The other thing is that um, that leaves me unsatisfied is I really think there's a huge difference between believing in God and loving God. And I am not convinced even a little bit that people who if people were given, obvious proof that God in front of them, that God's in front of them is like, hey God, it's like, yeah, okay, that's you. That they would come into like a loving relationship with him.
Oh, sure, yeah. I think
I
there are two different questions, right?
yeah, I think
One
like
is, yeah,
so a lot of very genuine people in the atheist community, if you ask them if God exists, would you worship him? And I'll say no. And I'd be like, okay, that doesn't make sense to me, but I got it. At least they're being super honest.
right.
And so that's why what I mean by satisfying is that it wouldn't lead necessarily to the result that I want, which is more people
Sure.
to
I guess
feel like they have this
may,
relationship.
maybe we don't see these things the same way, but it seems first you have to come to believe in this thing before you can come to love it.
Uh, one
Do
would
you
think that.
disagree with that?
I don't think that one necessarily has to. I think one is logically prior, but not necessarily mathematically prior or
What do you
temporally
mean by that?
prior. I think you can come to love and know God at the same time. Like that, so I'm not. I don't think that the process is, like in a human relationship. I first learned who Morgan was in high school, and then over time I came to love her, and then we got married. That's different from. I don't think that that's necessarily the same way in which we encounter God. Like, I think that the belief and love often come at the same time. It's not like, oh, I found out there's this dude who made everything. Let's see if he's worth worshiping or not. I don't think
You're
that's
saying that's not how things work.
I'm saying that I don't think that that's how most people to come to belief,
Why
and
do you
that's
think
why,
that is? Why is
because
that?
I
Why
think
is that
I think
difference?
it's I think most of the time for most people it's experiential, so it's immediate. So like they have the experience, and in that experience, there's their justification for both belief and for love. I'm not saying
Okay.
that that's the best. Like that's
Yeah.
epistemically the best way to go about
Yeah.
doing it, if there was such a thing as a best way. But I'm just saying that that's how I think it tends to happen. But when I said it's logically prior, what I mean is that, yeah, there are people who claim to be atheist Christians um, who worship God and you know whatever, but also claim to not hold a belief in Him. Uh, I I think that's crazy stuff talk. I don't think that's I, I I have a lot of trouble believing that that's genuine. Um, so
Yeah. I don't really understand the idea of loving something that you don't believe in.
yeah, neither do I. That's why I'm saying that I think it's logically prior, but not
Uh
necessarily
huh.
causally prior. So or temporally prior.
Uh huh.
So like the bowling ball that's resting in um, pillow causes a um, indentation in the pillow. Well, it's not like the indentation right now that it has was caused by the ball an hour ago. It's being caused by the ball right now. Like it's a simultaneous causation. But logically speaking, we know that the ball is causing the indentation. The indentation isn't causing the ball. So when I say logically prior,
Hmm.
that ball has to be there in order for this cause to happen. I guess it's necessary. In the same way, I would say belief in God is necessary to love God. Uh,
Yeah.
but I
We're on
don't
the
think that
same
it
page
has to
about
happen
that.
before. I
Yeah.
don't think it has to happen causally before. I think it could just happen all at once. We may be
Do you?
splitting hairs here.
Well, I think it's actually kind of interesting because this thing that so we're in total agreement, and I don't really think there's anything to talk about loving something that you don't believe in.
Yeah.
But this other side of the coin, which is that you're saying that for a lot of people, the love and the belief come together. I think that's really interesting because, like, do you think it could be maybe the feeling that's leading to the confidence of the belief?
Okay, so I'm gonna take a quick like step outside.
Yeah.
But I'm gonna get back. It's coming to. Um, there's a famous argument that gets poo-pooed on all the time, although there are a lot better versions of it now, called the ontological argument.
Uh huh.
And it was first formulated in Western thought by Anselm. And I'm not going to go through the argument, but what he stated was God properly understood must exist. And the argument essentially goes that if God is the greatest conceivable being, if he's possible, then that means if we think about anything that's greater than a possible greatest conceivable being, it would be one that's an actual greatest conceivable being, and therefore God is actual. Now, the new versions of it are a hell of a lot better, but also a hell of a lot more complicated. But when we get to this question about loving God, if you believe in God but don't love him, then I think you have a false understanding of what God is. So, under what I would call capital T theism, is the God of omnipotent, omnibenevolent, omnipresent, and of all of these things that we think of when we talk about God. But one of those is worthy of worship. And uh, if somebody told me, well, what if there's an evil God? I would say, well, then it wouldn't be God. There might be an evil creator, but it's not God. Like, I want to worship an evil creator.
Yeah. The
And
concept
so,
of God for you involves
so
beneficence.
involves, yeah, exactly. So for me, the idea of a person, it would be like saying, uh, imagine everybody in the world loved chocolate chip cookies. And then a person comes around and says, hey, I now believe in chocolate chip cookies, but I don't know if I love them yet, even though it was impossible not to love chocolate chip cookies. Like, so it seems to me like they don't understand what a chocolate chip cookie is if they don't love it. Like, I don't know how better to explain it, but like,
Yeah.
once you believe in that definition of God, um, like I believe in God and God holds these characteristics,
Yeah.
then I believe that it is
I,
impossible to genuinely hold those beliefs and not love him.
so I'm for the sake of limiting our conversation, I'm really interested in the belief and the justification for the belief part of
Correct.
this. As a like I'm really interested in the person who doesn't yet believe in chocolate chip cookies or who believes in chocolate chip cookies, but not whether or not they love them.
Yeah. I would
Right.
explain to that, or I would say to that person, um, you know, we'll stick with God here. I would say, I don't think you have a full understanding of God yet.
Sure.
So,
Okay.
so you
Yeah.
don't actually believe in God.
Yeah.
You believe in something close to God, and we can work out the details. But right now, what you're describing is a very powerful being that holds some of the qualities, but not all of the qualities required to
Sure.
be
I hear you
God.
making the distinction between a creator of the universe and God as you understand it.
Correct.
Um, but okay, so to try to put this together, I hear you saying that what's getting you to 80 to 90% are these philosophical arguments
Hmm.
that um, that your gut or there's something in you that would prefer um, something more tangible, like the difference between theorizing about the Higgs boson and knocking it around in a particle accelerator. You'd prefer being able to knock it around and to check up on it, but there's also some tension there. There's something in you that says maybe I shouldn't maybe I shouldn't want testable evidence. Is that is
Yeah.
that a good characterization?
Yeah. I think that's good characterization. And
What
and
what do
I
you think?
and let me give you a quick explanation. Uh, if if Morgan came to me today and said, "Look, I know you love me, but I would really prefer testable evidence. So over the next week,
Flowers.
I'm gonna ask you for a series of things, and if you do them, then I will believe you
Okay.
that you love me." I know I would be pretty pissed off about that. Uh, just be like, what do you mean? Like,
I think there's
don't you
something
know
about the
me?
challenge that's
Well,
inappropriate.
to me, yeah, it's like I'm like, don't you know me? Don't you know who I am and who I've been? And when I think of God as a personal being, it appears to me that that would be a similar that would fall in line with the statement and that I'm sure you've heard before: "Do not test the Lord your God," and that testing, which is weird because there's a couple of places in the Bible where God says straight up, "Test me on this," so there's some confusion. But it seems to me that that's not how you treat people or persons.
Sure, I
Persons,
think
yeah,
part of the problem is the challenge, the show about this. But imagine if your relationship with your wife was one where you didn't do things for her, you didn't help her, you didn't talk to her, you didn't provide for her, hug
hmm
her, and then she says, "It would be much easier to believe that you love me if you did things for me," right? Which is less confrontational,
yeah, certainly.
right? Do you think she would be justified in asking for that? Like it's hard for you to believe that you love me when you never hug me.
Yeah, uh, I would agree. However, I don't think it's an apt analogy. And the reason is I've already come to the belief that everything that I have via this argument has come from you. So I believe that I'm getting hugs all the time. Like that every second of my existence is sustained solely. Like yes, I completely agree with that. And I think that the issue is, there's this famous argument, or not argument, quick story, uh, where these two younger fish are swimming in the ocean and they swim up to an older fish, and the older fish says to the two younger ones, "Morning, how's the water, boys?" And the two younger fish swim off, and one says to the other, "What the fuck is water?"
Right.
And yeah, and so if you've ever listened to the famous speech by David Foster Wallace, if you haven't, Google him on YouTube. It's worth it.
Yeah, I'm not sure I'm going to take your advice because I'm pretty sure I read David Foster Wallace on your recommendation, and it was a mistake.
is very difficult. Yeah.
Yeah.
That I think the common claim is there are no fully read David Foster Wallace or David Wallace, whatever. I always get confused.
Yeah.
Books on the shelves
No,
anywhere.
I
Like they just
read
don't
Infinite
exist.
Jest, and
Yeah.
so I'm no longer taking recommendation.
Uh, but just briefly, the problem that I would say is not that you aren't getting hugs; it's you're not recognizing them in the same way that it's not that these fish aren't in water; they just don't see it. Um,
So I'm not trying. I don't want to try to like trap you in a contradiction. I'm legitimately trying to understand. I had heard you say before that you didn't have personal experience to like rely on.
not to the strength of which I have been explained by others. Like I don't
So
think that I've had the same degree.
but it sounds like you're suggesting here that there is a personal experience of feeling loved. Is am I understanding correctly?
Uh, uh, there are certain times where I feel some sort of like existential love, but mostly it's rational. Mostly I will look at something beautiful that's happened to me, like the birth of my children, and in my mind, I will thank God for that. Like I will rationally, my mind will go from this came, like will go, this thing is awesome and it came from God. Thank you, God. And it's not like I saw him,
Right.
deliver the baby or something, or
Right.
that creepy picture of Jesus with his hands over the surgeon. It's not anything like that. Uh, but yeah, I think that it's that perspective of consciously under or consciously thinking. I'm going to try and refrain from using the word understanding because there's debate, but thinking that all of this around me comes from God. And
But what I
because of
hear
that,
you saying
yeah,
is that that things in your life have happened, beautiful things, the birth of your children, etc. Sorry, I know that sounds dismissive, the birth of your children, etc. But obviously there's important things,
it's
in
pretty
our
gross too. It's beautiful and gross.
but these things you've attributed to God, but I would assume that comes because of your belief based on these arguments,
Correct.
right? Like that's what comes first, and then the
Correct.
attribution comes.
Correct.
So is it possible that the attribution could be mistaken?
Sure.
Okay.
But take the example that you provided, videotaped, million people saw it happen live, and then those
Yeah.
same million people give identical testimonies,
And they
etc.
all agreed. Yeah.
Yeah, and it turns out it was the devil.
Sure. Okay.
So like I just I don't I think that skepticism is available to us in every type of um, belief formation, whether that's empirical in the standard sense of using our senses and the senses as most people think of them,
So I'm
or
hearing you
thought.
react to this because I know from earlier in the conversation, right? There's something in you that is saying that this videotape evidence isn't satisfying. Hold on just one second. And I guess I'm hearing you dismiss it. I don't hope that's not too strong a word, but I'm hearing you dismiss this idea of having this empirical evidence as saying that, well, it could be the devil. But could it not also be the devil who's providing these arguments, the kalam cosmological argument?
Sure.
So is it really fair to dismiss those things? Like, which could we trust more?
So I guess what I'm trying, I don't know how to answer your question.
Let me ask you something super simple. Let's say let's say one person had this evidence and talked to people and everybody agreed, and we had video and God was speaking and he hugged people, whoever asked for a hug. Some people don't like hugs. And then over here we have these arguments. Which do you think is more trustworthy? Which method of getting to the conclusion is more trustworthy?
Honestly, I think the arguments.
How's that?
So I trust my rational faculties more than I trust my sense perceptions. So if you gave me I'm trying to come up with a decent analogy. But I guess the way that I would say it is I'm more confident in so let's take the Higgs boson example.
Okay.
If you took me in there and people showed me on the screen, the video evidence of this happening, the burst of energy,
Yeah.
I'd be like, the fuck did I just see? But then if given enough time, I learned the numbers. The way that I would believe that that was a Higgs boson was because I saw the math that said that would happen. Not if I saw that would happen, I would go back and be able to figure out that that's a Higgs boson. In fact, if I saw that happen and I couldn't find a mathematical reason for it, describing it, I would remain agnostic as to what it was, what it was doing. And so, I think the best way to say it is I trust my rational faculties more than my sense perceptions.
So I'm going to give you a hypothetical. let's imagine we live in a world. I know some people have difficulty with hypotheticals. I think you take to them like a
I
duck to
love them.
water. Yeah.
But I'm going to warn you, I have a non-hypothetical, which
Uh,
is in 5 minutes, my kids turn into pumpkins.
pumpkins. Yeah,
But I
that's
would
fair.
also extend, I would love to continue this conversation on
Yeah,
another day because
great.
even if it's not recorded, this is
I
so
think
much
we
fun.
can wrap it up in 5 minutes.
Okay.
Um, so let's sort of end with the hypothetical.
Okay.
So imagine we live in a very different world than the world we live in now,
Yep.
where you, through these arguments, have come to a belief in Christianity. So that part's the same. Um, but much of the rest of the world um, believes in Hinduism because of actual experience. The gods of Vishnu and Krishna come to Earth and walk around and do acts that people can see and videotape. And there's videos on YouTube, and you've seen them sometimes when they come to your town. Um, which do you think would be more reliable?
So I'm going to try not to point out concerns with the hypothetical too much.
You don't think
Um,
it's possible?
well, no, just that, well, there could be these beings on Earth doing all these incredible things and still be God,
Oh yeah, they could be
right?
aliens.
Yeah.
Yeah, sure.
Um, and so because of that, I I would need someone to show me where my reasoning is false.
Yeah,
Like just point out where the premise is wrong.
yeah,
Like, and that was, with the cosmological argument, Leibniz had a clear problem in it. He had a problem, or not the cosmological argument, Anselm's and the ontological argument
hmm,
had a clear problem in it uh, called a modal collapse, which is basically where possibility and necessity become one and the same, not just for God, but for everything. Um, and so it had to be reformatted, and it actually took years and years of improvement in actual modal logic before it was ever able to be uh, brought back. So yeah, what you're basically, to me, the way it feels right now is like saying, imagine having a whole bunch of other creatures walking around, and one of the things that entails those creatures being there is that 1 + 1 does not equal 2. And then now that's an exaggeration, of course, because I'm more certain of 1 + 1 = 2 than I am of the existence of
okay,
God and of
good. I'm
Christianity.
glad.
Uh, um, but I would need somebody to show me, like,
Yeah,
I just don't get it why this means that 1 + 1 doesn't equal 2.
I
So
think that's fair. All right, well, thank you so much,
cool. This
Russ,
was so much
for.
fun.
I'm so glad to hear you say that. I'm glad you had fun. I'll let you run. If you want to keep talking at some point, let me know.
Cool. Sounds good, man.
All right,
Thanks.
have a good
Catch
day.
you later.
Thanks. See
Bye.
you.